or Rocket Mortgage. You got to change that. Morning, everyone. Welcome in. Betsperts Golf here for a little bit of Rocket Mortgage recap and your first look here at the John Deere Classic. Summer continues on. Here, as always, my guy Ron Klos, PGA Splits 101, who had boots on the ground all week in Detroit. I know it was inside the ropes for a while yesterday too, getting to, taking some of that. How did Rocket treat you, Ron? And any takeaways that you have for us here before we turn the page to the John Deere?
Yeah, it's always a fun time. It's so different when you're actually there in person, and you get behind the tee box and you see those drives, and you think you hit some good ones, and then you see these guys just whip out 340-yard draws, and it's amazing to see. And so yeah, that was also interesting. Getting into the playoff, you know, there's been a few playoffs, but it's always ended on the 18th hole, because that was obviously the first one, and to go from, the par 3 15th, which was just so different. And then, you got the par 4, and then you go to the par 5, and then it still didn't end. And so, yeah, you got the fans are scurrying everywhere. And, it was pretty chaotic there and then the guys were teeing off quickly. Like, there wasn't long waits once they got to the hole. They were pretty fast. So, it was a great time, just seeing the city of Detroit. Detroit gets a bad rap for a lot of things over the years, but there are definitely a lot of parts of the downtown area, and this wasn't downtown, but about 10 miles north, still in the city limits. But just great to see Detroit show out like that. And yeah, you got Pod Geeter. I saw him. I think it was on Tuesday practice round, and just I think I followed him for maybe 6 or 7 holes, and you just see what he was doing off the tee, everything in the fairway. His approach game, which he's still not the best wedge player in the world, but he was pretty dialed in, and I could see that early. And again, I don't like making much. A lot of people get into, oh well, if you have people watching, like boots on the ground, you can. I don't think you can make great determinations on players unless you're actually with them like the whole week, like Monday, Tuesday.
It's
You're
hard.
seeing every shot. Like, you can't just take a little snippet. Oh, this guy, oh, he hit that one shot to 2 feet, and so I'm going to play him this week. But I followed him for a while, and that's what I like to do. I like to stick with a certain player or group for, see what they're doing for a range of holes. And I saw he was doing well. And you go to Max Gracerman, a guy who I thought fit that course perfectly, just with his length off the tee, his ability to get hot on the greens. I think his approach game is underrated. It's a little inconsistent, a little streaky, but he was first in my rabbit hole model, which you can go back and look on the site. And so I thought it was a great fit for him. And so, yeah, just seeing those two guys, and obviously Chris Kirk always plays well in Detroit. He missed that really short putt there, which was shocking to everyone. But yeah, a lot of these guys, Podgeeter's been in the mix, and I think some of that, even though he's so young, still had a little bit of that scar tissue built up. He had runner up in Mexico, and this is Gracerman's fourth runner up. So I'm not gonna say we're getting into Cam Young territory with him yet, because obviously Cam Young's been on the tour for a lot longer. Gracerman's still pretty young. I think Gracerman has, I'm not gonna bash Cam Young here, but I think Gracerman has a little better mental makeup than Cam Young does. So I expect Gracerman to come through here soon. But all in all, yeah, it was a great week, and we're kind of getting more of the same this week. Another tree-lined course with a lot of wedges. Easy scoring. Unfortunately for the people in Illinois, the field is pretty much a lot weaker. It usually is. It's actually a little bit stronger when you get into the mid-level than it typically is. But yeah, we should see another kind of birdie fest putting contest this week.
Yeah, no, we should get more of the same. Yeah, I mean, you make a good point in terms of following the guys around. This is really tough, right? You're just gonna, pick and choose. It's all relative to your point. It's all going to look good to an untrained eye that's not watching these guys versus their baseline week in and week out. Same thing. You're sitting on the range and watch guys stripe it on the range and really have no idea, unless you just got done talking with them and their caddy about what they're like actually working on. So it can, influence you negatively in the sense that you just can get confirmation bias. I mean, what Podgeeter can do off the tee is absolutely insane. Because even some of the other Gracerman off the tee is a monster. To be honest, I mean, he can mash it off the tee. And there's just some times where Poggitter just so far in a different world, ball speed wise. Just his baseline is kind of wild. So 20 to kind of cross the finish line. Like you said, we had the Ned Bank last year, Mexico, which is just brutal. I'm still sore from the Mexico one. That was the Brian Campbell ricochet off of the tree. Yesterday was also painful. Someone who had Jake Knapp and Michael Thorbjornsen, who both missed the playoff by a stroke. And thinking back and watching a lot of their golf over the week, needing one more shot to get into the playoffs. Not hard to find those shots for them when those situations happen. But definitely that profile, again, debates on Twitter this week about Bombers course or whatnot, like getting in the minutia of what that is, and was talking down to people because people are classifying that way, which I'm not sure is a great job to reach the audience that you're looking to do. But at the same time, like, it was a driver heavy golf course with little missed fairway penalty. So and then you had a fair amount of bombers. Now, again, you could very much be in the mix here without absolutely mashing it off the tee in Detroit. You could do the same thing in the John Deere, but when guys are hitting driver at an above average tour rate and there's really no missed fairway penalty or rough penalty or water in play, that's what you're going to have. So a little bit different this week, not quite as I would say bomber friendly than what we had last week in Detroit, but pretty much the same field, except like no Morikawa, no Cantley, no Hideki. And anyone that showed a pulse in Detroit is just demolished on the odds board. And that's tough. This is always one of the harder ones for me mentally to bet in the outrights, because you have to completely divorce yourself from where these guys typically are on the odds board. It's definitely field adjusted. And then even more so from last week, you'll see, like I said, anyone that showed a pulse is in a very, 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 very different spot. Let's take a look here at some of our opening odds. This is courtesy of our friends over at Gambly. Great tool. Check it out. You can see Ben Griffin at the top of the board, 16, 16 best in the market here at a few different spots. Jason Day's in the field as well, 25, looking like the best number on a Monday morning. Danny McCarthy has had a nice run here historically. I think like 3 straight T7 or better. JT Poston, I think, has had some nice finishes here as well. This is kind of a JT Poston type swing, 33s. Siwoo in the mix. Your defending champ, Davis Thompson, 35. It's a pretty good number. Chris Kirk here from last week. You see Thor Bjornsson again, 100 last week, 30 and change this week. Which is, again, just you have to kind of adjust for what's going on. Jake Knapp, 35. Sanjay, 35. Like, that's a big number for Sanjay in this field. But Sanjay win golf tournaments doesn't happen very often. So that's a bigger number for Sanjay. But Cauley, Kevin Yu, Goddard, Clanton at 40. Glover's had some nice showings here. Pearson Coody, this is, again, a wild number, in my opinion. Pearson Coody, at 45. Sam Stevens, Poggitter, Hubbard, Gerard, Michael Kim, a handful of others at 50. So a lot of guys in this range. Be interested to see what kind of shifting happens here on a Monday morning as some popular names get bet and some guys, maybe don't get any attention. See if there's some bigger numbers there. But, I'm debating on going back to the well from an approach standpoint last week, where I had 8 guys on the card and 6 were 90 or longer. That's a tough pool to swim in this week, just because the win equity down there is pretty tough. Again, you're going to open the odds here and really kind of be electrocuted with surprise here. It's just not a price that you typically see next to a lot of these guys, but here we are. So you want to talk to us about the course? What should we expect from TBC Deere Run?
Yeah, so very similar to last week in a lot of ways in Detroit. You have a par 71, so not 72. Pretty much the same average per par, right around 7,300 yards. This is the 20th shortest course on tour. So you have a lot of some of the par fours can get kind of longer in the 450 plus range. There's some longer par threes here than you would expect on a shorter course. You have not a lot of water, still only 3 water danger holes. Plays scoring wise over the last 5 years, its average per round is minus 1.57. You got bentgrass fairways again, bentgrass greens. The big difference for me is when you look at for the rough here. So it's the same exact listing as Detroit Golf Club, 4 inches, Kentucky bluegrass. Here, there's a little bit of fescue mixed in, but like I tweeted early in the week when I was, walking the course in Detroit, every single year, the rough maybe tops out at 3 inches at the deepest point. And it's usually patchy in a lot of spots because there's so many trees surrounding so many, especially the fairways and the greens in Detroit, that the rough just doesn't come in that lush. And so here, though, it's completely different. Now, having never been walking on the grounds, but I can just reports I've seen and from TV, it's a lot lusher here. There's actually a high missed fairway penalty if you're missing drives. So that's the one big difference here. But again, going back, just overall, you got a course with putting contest, low scoring shootout, wide fairways. That's why if you look at yes, like you said earlier, driver usage is not as high as Detroit, but if you look at the last 3 years, we're like right at 72%. And if you go back before then, it was kind of in the low 60s. So, we got guys kind of pulling more driver out here. And so I think, for me, I'm not going to really look at like, oh, it's driver heavy off the tee. But I think some guys, like a Davis Thompson, who just had a great run here last year, guys who are very accurate, can pull out driver and can, get some, gain some strokes that way as well. But, you do have some tight dog legs to deal with, which is another reason, you do lay up on some of these holes. Similar to Detroit, greens are very receptive, because of the heat. We're getting into July here, they have to water the greens. And so, you're going to just always have these receptive greens at these courses in the summertime. And putting is pretty straightforward here. It's there's not a lot of undulations. It's pretty easy compared to tour average. And so, yeah, that's kind of the rundown. And then, you look at some of the past winners here, JT Poston, Steve Stricker, Jordan Spieth, Brian Harmon. You kind of looking for fairway finders, accurate wedge players who can kind of get, streaky hot, use the floor ceiling filter. And the rabbit hole is going to be great for looking at putting upside this week.
You see, we got loose last year a little bit with Davis Thompson, running away a little bit, but the rest of the field still, you had a significant number of guys sub 20, which is like 16 guys. Whereas years past, it was kind of right around where the winning score was. Is there anything in particular that jumps out in terms of last year? I know you touched on a little bit about what happened, but was there anything weather-wise that we remember? I can't remember anything. I was trying to think because this jumped out at me, and I'm like, why was last year so crazy comparatively?
I just, I know I like to always make the correlation when I see driver usage going up that guys are just getting more aggressive, which,
Yeah.
getting them even shorter irons into these greens. So I think that's one of the reasons. Like we've seen even scoring. If you go to the scoring section, I'm trying to remember, but I'm pretty sure we've seen scoring get even easier here. And so, yeah, you can see, last year, and it's not like because it's like some of these courses, like where Travelers is a signature event, and you see scoring get really easy because you have a higher rank of players coming in.
Yeah.
Like this is pretty consistently, and so as far as a weak field, so I think players are just getting more aggressive. Players are, whether you want to call it equipment or whatnot, I don't think there's anything specific other than guys are just getting a little more aggressive. And as far as the rough goes, it looked like when I looked last night, I'll have to check again, but the fairway penalty was still somewhat high. If you're missing in that thick rough. So, but yeah, that's a good question to maybe explore a little further as far as digging into that a bit more.
This little subset here is kind of fascinating when you look at driver usage, as you said, trending up. But last year, 320 plus drives were down a little bit back into like the 2021, 2019 range. But accuracy is kind of remaining fairly strong. but above tour average, which is, interesting to see too. And then the good drive percentage still comfortably above tour average, even though we do have a rough penalty, right? So, tricky. I think without getting tied personally into some of the minutia of some of it, it's just going to be easier, be easy scoring conditions, just pulling out anything that's difficult, same thing field wise. And then same thing from like a course length standpoint, right? So on the shorter end, just average short, very short, just to get a sense in who's played there. It's just kind of, again, pulling out strong fields, difficult scoring, and long golf courses, and just kind of, sussing it out from there. Because it's kind of is a little confusing from year to year. There feels like there's a lot more nuance to this than just kind of the raw trends, because this is not telling necessarily a super predictive story.
And I'll note one other change around the green is among the 10 toughest on tour here. So, you kind of get into some trickier lies as far as the thick rough. There are also some kind of runoff collection areas, which you didn't really see a whole lot in Detroit. You did have a lot of the, obviously in Detroit, the Donald Ross sloping greens, from back to front. And you did have, some holes where, you would see the ball run off into the collection area if you were short siding yourself there. But I do, that's another thing to keep in mind, even though, and this is another course where, if you're missing greens here, you're probably not in contention anyways, because, greens and reg is so easy. But if you do miss, it is going to kind of compound things here. And, this is not a course where you want to be obviously missing greens and having to try to make up for it around the green.
Yep. No, good call. I see the greens and reg rate, though, is trending last year is part of it. I mean, that speaks to some of why the scoring was lower. A jump in greens and reg rate, but overall 5-year rolling average is 5.5%, 6% above a tour average event. So that's why you guessing we probably meet somewhere in the middle, closer to the 21, 22 range, like we were here historically, and where we were last week versus in Detroit versus what we had last year. But who knows? I mean, Davis Thompson separated, but he wasn't alone. There was a handful of guys right behind. All right, cool. What do you want to look at here in the rabbit hole? Anything in particular? Some of those, big picture things that we were looking at or talking about. It's a good way to start.
Yeah, this is one where I'm definitely kind of combining very short, and average for course length with weak field. I think this is one where we've done that before with kind of the tougher, longer courses. So just a way to kind of eliminate the long and the very strong fields. And I think this is just a great baseline to get a representation of. And even all three, because there are basically your birdie fests are going to be very similar in this way. And now you get into Mexico, like Mexico's a longer course, so you may have to take one of these out, but interesting to see what we get from this subset here.
Yeah, we typically don't do this. I mean, you can look at these independently, scoring conditions, course length, field strength. I do think, looking at kind of round robin, looking at two of them together in each bucket, right? Scoring conditions, field strength, scoring conditions, course length, field strength, just to kind of see what pops. Obviously, you'd be a little bit of double counting in there, but I don't know. I don't think it's a terrible way to look at things. We're essentially just wanting to rule out the things that aren't checked here. As I was saying, like I if you played really well at Bay Hill, you might not even be in this field, to be honest, right? If you played really well at Muirfield Village or Oakmont, that's great. I'd love to have that for a Ben Griffin, but I know what Ben Griffin is at this point, right? So I'm really trying to get a sense of the rest of the field. How are they playing when we are in, these types of unique settings? So 6 months might not be the best sample. You may want to back out a little bit, probably at least 9 months or just all of 2025, or try to capture the last 12 months here just to see who's played well, easier, shorter, weaker fields. And Ben Griffin is at the top. Last 12 months, Ben Griffin is, in a pretty sizable sample. We'll see how that works out from an average standpoint. It's getting a little bump for his samples. So Jason Day isn't playing a lot of these, but has played well. And what are those courses? Let's see what these Jason Day rounds were over the last 12 months. Amex, John Deere. Okay. Interesting. There's Poston. Not surprising. Ben Griffin, Davis Thompson, Luke Clanton. There's Denny McCarthy. Nico had a nice little showing on the weekend in Detroit. Like to see that combined with the recent form. Rico Hoey, kind of the Rico Hoey 101 story last week. The putting, just, the rest of it's great. Putting is really atrocious. Michael Kim, Joe Highsmith, Ricky Fowler, Eric Cole are your top guys in this data set. You can mess around with the sample if you want. We're kind of hovering around. This is what I would expect to see. Some of the better players, you're going to have a smaller sample. And some of the, not as strong players, the sample is going to be a little bit larger. But, hovering around at least 30 rounds or so for most of these guys. And that's probably a pretty safe range to kind of hang into. So just in terms of like an anchor baseline stat, if you're modeling this week, I would have a variation of this, whether it's this specifically or combinations like I was saying. Like, I think this is a great way to kind of lean on, just kind of core fundamental research for the week is who's playing well in these types of conditions, because that's really the test. Short-term rolling form, you're going to catch some stuff I don't think you really want in here in terms of just modeling over a larger sample.
And really quick, there's a name on here, and we'll see if you can pick it out, that continues to confound me. He finishes horribly every week when I model him, yet he continues to be on the top of the leaderboards almost, not every week, but almost every week. And he's a guy who's really good with the putter. And last week he modeled like in the 60s for me, even though he's already won on tour. You have any idea who I'm talking about on this page you're looking at here?
Highsmith?
No,
Highsmith or Cole?
Nico Echeverria. He's
Okay.
like, he's just not good. The flat stick has carried him so far, and interesting to see. I haven't looked at what he did, excelled in last week in Detroit, but the data is good, so we're good to look at it. It's been updated. But yeah, there you see. So again, he's not long off the tee. Very consistent usually with the putter, and when he dials an approach, I know some of the bigger fields, as far as the major, he didn't do well, but when you get into kind of some of these weak fields, you see CJ Cup, and you go down there, like Valspar's a tough course.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's a guy who
he had a great swing season. I mean,
tends to pop. Yeah, yep.
He was Zozo's solid field, actually. Probably not even in this data set. It actually is probably from small fields. But yeah, I mean, this is interesting profiles you see when there's some real bad approach numbers. But you said these are some of the tougher fields. Sometimes the putting can do a lot of work. To be honest, putting's got to do a lot of work here, right? So it does matter. It's up to you how much you want to weigh it or put it in your model. But the putter is going to have to be a factor for you this week. So, and you like to see how he played on the weekend. Obviously, he got it going a little bit in Detroit, just posted a number and got caught. But some good golf. I want to see that kind of roll over here a little bit more so than anything. Kind of these weaker fields in the summer, recent form, spot to spot. I feel like it matters even a little bit more. I'm going to look more at short-term form than I would typically in a normal baseline model. So,
and this gets me thinking. I think a great addition to the rabbit hole would be, obviously every player has their baseline, but then you look at a guy like Echeverria, you get him in a weaker field, his baseline goes up. So I think it'd be really cool to see, plus minus, when you look at, say, weak fields compared to strong fields, looking at a guy's baseline. I think being able to, because right now, like, we're just looking at the straight data from all these different, filters. But, when you can see, a guy's, half a stroke better in weaker fields, that adds a little more meaning to these numbers. So I think that'd be a cool addition to look into here.
Yeah. Let's just play around with this a little bit and see what we get. So I'm going to pull out field strength first. Mostly same data set. See who kind of pops. We'll add that back in. Just kind of mess around with it this way. Clanton, get a bigger sample for Jason Day here. Clanton at the top. JT Poston, Ben Griffin, Rico again, Davis Thompson, Kevin Roy. Smaller sample for Kevin Roy. Vic Perez. There's Eric Cole again. Kitayama, Sanjay, Kim, Cooch, Bridgman. So similar names. I'm messing around with that. We'll put field strength back in, and then I'll take out course length. kind of want everything through the lens of easier scoring conditions, because I think that's, I'm just picking one. To me, that's kind of the most important one that's tying in some of the other stuff here. Ben Griffin, JT Poston, Davis Thompson, Kevin Roy, Samuel got bigger. Jason Day, Luke Clanton, Lucas Glover's nice history here. Can he make enough putts? This is an interesting discussion. Brian Campbell owes me money. Michael Kim, Andrew Putnam, Ricky Fowler, and then there's Nigo again. So again, we're swimming in the right waters, right? If you're just trying to find a baseline DFS player pool before you get into ownership projections, and just some guys that you need to be putting on your watch list, do a little bit more research in, dig deeper into the rabbit hole on this week. I think these kind of subsets are the people that you want to be looking at this week, who's really been able to separate in some of these easier scoring conditions on, shorter courses or against weaker competition. So, a guy like Sanjay, you would expect him to really pop up here, but just class wise, but the approach games have been kind of rough. Where's he been in shorter term stuff? It's not good. I didn't even know he was in the field, to be honest. You can see approach the last 12 months has been pretty abysmal. It's been struggling on Sundays, wedges especially, which is not great for what we need this week, but looks like a lot of red. I mean, this is rough. This is worse than I even thought, to being honest. And again, he's playing some strong courses in competition, but like, this is bright red. There's some weaker stuff in here too that's still bright red. So yeah, interesting. When's the last time he hasn't gained an approach since Palm Beach, and he missed a cut? I mean, this is wild. He's gained strokes on approach 3 times this year. I mean, this was his calling card forever, right? I mean, this is what he had was he's gonna gain an approach. I mean, look, there's a lot of green here historically. We start rolling back on Sanjay, so hope he finds it. I can see him being just based on just the number in the field, people clicking on him this week, because he's just the class better historically than a lot of other guys. But man, data is bad. Thoughts on Jake Knapp from Matt in the chat? Yeah, I mean, look, you're on mute. You want to jump in on Knapp? Like,
my bad. I said I know you're mad at him still. So
no, he's fascinating to watch. He's so fun to watch. That swing is just insane. Just kind of a tempo god. Can pound it. The putter can get really hot. His short game was pretty decent. He no-showed on Thursday. That was frustrating. Everyone's going really low, and he just kind of goes out there and posts one birdie, one bogey, and does what he did on Friday because he can do that. But then he left so many putts short. I know you weren't, you were kind of with a different group early on Sunday and, probably chasing leaders late. He left, I mean, I'm not exaggerating. I think he left probably at least 10 putts short. Makeable putts, not just like lag putts where he's trying to leave himself short on the right side of, an uphill tap in. Like, I'm just talking makeable putts, and he did very much down the stretch too. So that was frustrating. So, you got a ton of talent in there though. So, is this a place for him for you? For me, it's not necessarily. I don't know. I like to see overall the form is pretty good.
Yeah, not as much. I'm going to be a little more selective this week with, looking at accuracy off the tee more than last week for sure. Because I think, the missed fairway penalty, like we said, is higher. So I still think he's a good play because he does tend to excel on a lot of these easier courses. Obviously, one in Mexico. But yeah, I'm focusing a little more on. I will look at total driving, distance from edge of the fairway. I think you're going to see the driver trend continue. So I think for me that bumps, distance from edge of the fairway a little more this week than maybe last year or other years when I wasn't, I think that trend matters. So,
Yeah.
and that's why, a guy like a Jason Day who, doesn't play many of these weak field events. Obviously he's trying to boost his standings here. I think he's really interesting this week. And, just look at the class of a player he is. And even Ben Griffin, I know people are going to talk about this. This is his 10th week playing out of the last 11. But he did this earlier in the year too, where he had this stretch where he just played like I think 10 in a row as well, and he's just like a robot at this point. You see him on the putting green. I talked to him a little bit, but he's just always smiling out there, always in a good mood.
Mhm.
And so I think he's a guy who just generally loves to play, and obviously he's chasing the Ryder Cup. I know that's really big for him, so that's something that's playing on behind the scenes as well. But yeah, I think it's going to be hardest to stay away from him in DFS because even though last week he had a couple rounds where he fell back a little, but I think his consistent level, when you look at his log, is pretty steady. So he's not a guy who I would expect to the heats or playing this many in a row. It just doesn't seem to bother him.
No, yeah, I agree. He seems to be playing and carrying himself with such a sense of confidence right now. And why wouldn't he? I mean, he's been playing outstanding golf. So, 16 is tough. Single bullet at the John Deere, but to each their own. I get it. I mean, he right now feels like the class of this field. Question in the chat on Bridgman. Thoughts on Bridgman? Need to roll it here. Do you think his ball striking is solid enough? Decent number in this field. Let's see where Bridgman's been at here as of late and see where he popped in some of this other stuff that we just did. I didn't see him. Maybe we
Yeah,
did
he's a
once
guy
a
who
little bit.
I followed him a little bit. He's a guy who he's had some good results this year. Like you said, really good with the putter. Ball striking is questionable at times, and yeah, you could see, yeah, you have to go up there, but
Yeah, sorry, I was down from Sanjay. Yeah. Look, it's a different field, right? So none of this is super appealing, but he's got a PGA Championship and a U.S. Open in here, Travelers Memorial. Like these are, definitely different tracks. T4 at the truest with a lot of red outside of the putting, just kind of an interesting
signature event too.
Signature event. Very, very interesting. Yeah, not for me, but I understand it. I mean, I feel like if you're pulling longer data, you're getting some of this in here, right? This little March stretch of where he played some really, really good golf. Has not shown that quite as much as of late. But again, I'm not going to step on anyone's long shot here. I'm not even sure where he is on the odds board, to be honest. So, if he even constitutes as a long shot here, because 70. Okay. Yeah, I get it. Didn't see him popping any of these. Okay, he's right around here. So yeah, I mean, pretty balanced outside of the off the tee stuff. So not a guy for me, but I understand why someone would do it. So it's the kind of week that we have this week. All right. Anything else we want to touch on here before we take off?
I think it's a great week as well, like many are too. The floor ceiling and the finish position filter that we have, because you can take all these filters and add them, throw them in the finish position, and you can kind of see. It's a different way to look at upside, basically. You can
Sure.
see which guys are popping the top 5, top 10. And again, if you're playing DFS on DraftKings, FanDuel, whatever, I use this every week. I look at make the cut percentage, and it's a great way to see when you have these conditions. Certain guys, even they could be guys way low down the board in the 6K range. For salaries, I know DraftKings salaries are not out yet, but it's a great way to view kind of guys who may not have upside, but if you're just looking for a guy, you just need someone to make the cut, get into the weekend, maybe give themselves a chance. It's a great way to narrow down your player pool. So I love looking at this page with all these different filters mixed in.
Yes, just looking here, weak fields, easy scoring conditions, last calendar year. Jason Day and Denny McCarthy are the only guys that are making the cut 100% of the time. You can see their starts here, so smaller sample for those two guys, but there's good news for Knapp. Probably not expecting to see a Victor Perez up there, so that speaks to what you're talking about, right? Trying to bang 6 home. Kevin Roy's up here, even Doug Gim, who can't putt, is up here. Gerard, Campbell. So, you know, watch sample size. But Vince Whaley, this is a large sample of Vince Whaley comparatively making the cut, 75% of the time. So it's definitely an interesting look.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just noticed this. This is new. Click on the blue number. Now you can also look at, okay, so I want to see which events this was. So we have this for rounds, but now you can click on the blue PGA starts number and it will actually show you the events played, the tournaments.
Yeah, so these are Ben Griffin starts under this subset of data. So you can see the majors are out of this. Most of the signature events are going to be out of this too. So this gives you actual details on how we performed in all of those. So very cool. Love it. New stuff always coming. This page right here is going to have a tab for strokes gain data very, 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 very soon, and probably a matter of days. So you want to just see not just past leaderboards and how they scored and what they shot in each round. You're going to be able to get the strokes gain data for all of that too. So continuing to add and do new things to make this the best resource for you out there for sure. So yeah, again, like you said, finishing positions, looking at floor ceiling to get a sense of, spike performance, spike putting, all those things, I think are great resources this week. So love it. All right, buddy. Appreciate you thumping the payment for us in Detroit. We needed that Thor question answered last week and you were able to answer it. Firsthand information with JJ and Thor himself. So good to see. And you almost got home, which would have been absolutely awesome. Like I was frustrated with Nap, but I was cheering for Thor. That's my guy. I wanted him to get over the finish line, and it's only a matter of time. Maybe
he's got great course history here. Like this is one of the few courses he's played twice, and I think he's got a 6 and a 17 here. So yeah,
he was second last year. He was second. I had to take it last year. Right. He wasn't close necessarily, but he finished 4 back. So yeah. Great question, Gino. Should the Rocky be elevated? It was fun.
Yeah.
Right?
Hey, with the renovation this, next year,
we'll
it's going back to old Donald Ross origin. So from what I've heard, there's no plans to make that happen, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's fun. Hey, that was a fun watch on Sunday. Leaderboard jam-packed, birdies all over the place. Guys just hitting casual 350-yard drives. Like, I'm all right with that. Occasionally, like, let's mix in some of those. Those are fun to watch. So, all right, make sure you hit the subscribe before you take off. Betspertsgolf.com. I'll be back on Tuesday for the betting show with myself and Andy. We'll have some more discussion on the guys that we actually played here. So, and again, continue to follow Ron on Twitter at PGA Splits 101. We'll see y'all soon. Thanks, everybody.